Sipe, and happy to join you today for our second installment of the Civil War Enrichment Pack free lessons. Before we get into the lesson today, I want to talk a little bit about the room, make sure that everybody understands how to use the room to the best of their abilities. If you are watching this lesson on YouTube, you will not have the full functionality of the Adobe Connect room. You should see some buttons popping up around this recording that allows you to access that. If you don't have the ability to view this Adobe recording, you can watch it in YouTube, and that's going to be fine. I'm going to make sure that you're connected to the appropriate resources. You'll see a playlist link and some other things that'll make the video work as close to possible as you would get in the full function Adobe Connect room. For those of you who are in the room, I just want to demonstrate a few things here real quick. Let me go ahead and toss my logo to the side, the Sipe Society logo. Now, normally, the way this works, if we were in real time and we weren't recording this lesson for regular use, I can play YouTube videos, which is most of what we are going to be working with today over here in the web links area. Mostly it's going to be YouTube videos, but because of licensing issues, I am not able to record those links and then play them back. So what I'm going to do is actually open the links directly for you. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I've also got some directions over here that we'll bring out throughout the lesson today to make sure you know what to do. We'll share my screen real quick. And I'll show you what happens. You can follow along, and this will happen in real time on your own screen. But let's say that I wanted to share a link to start a video. All I have to do is go over here to the web links. I select the video. I select Browse to as the presenter, and it jumps right up, which is what you should be seeing right now is the Sipe Society sign up area. If you haven't done so, be sure to sign up for our free resources. We send these out about once a week, whether it be a lesson like we have today, our free homeschool guide to social studies. We're looking at our next freebie is probably going to be a series of social studies U.S. history flashcards. So if you wanted to get this type of great resource in your mailbox, be sure to sign up at sipesociety.com. But again, the idea here is I click the link and I'm able to open it for you. Now, if for some reason your link does not open, we tell you here's a link, it should be opening, it doesn't open, you can also access these yourself. Just select the video, select the resource that you want to visit, click Browse to, and away you go. So again, with that much in mind, there will be a fair amount of stopping and starting, and you're going to be expected to check out other videos because that's what today's lesson is all about. Before we get into it, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off with the Rebel Yell. So what I'll do is I'll start this video, and we're going to watch about, I want to say about the first minute and 55 seconds of this. I've got that indicated in this notes area out here. I'm going to ask you to pause this recording, pause the actual lesson recording, and I'll open up the Rebel Yell, and we'll check out just a few minutes of this this rather old news clip and get an idea about what we're doing today. Go ahead and pause your recording now. And we're back in 3, 2. Okay, so there you have it. One of the best primary sources I can think of for studying the Civil War is to listen to the actual words of the people that lived through it. The clip that you just saw is actually very common. It's had over 1 million views on YouTube, and it is fascinating to be able to actually hear the rebel yell, the battle cry of the Confederacy from the very men who made that call at places like Shiloh and Appomattox, Gettysburg. Again, just a reminder, primary sources are those sources that come from the event, whether it be an eyewitness, a photograph, a handwritten account. Those secondary sources are things that come after the fact, an interpretation. Perhaps a notes from an interview with a Confederate war soldier might be secondary sources. We're going to be focusing on primary sources today, but there are some variations to that, and I'll point those out to you as we go through the items today. Much of the available clips that you can find through YouTube, a lot of them have to do with soldiers, and most notably, there's a real seems to be a real interest in the Confederate soldier, something that fascinated people during the mid 1900s, to the point where they often emphasize these soldiers when it comes to these recordings. But the reality of the situation is, and I am amazed by this, that we can still hear the narratives of the Civil War in the voices of the men and women who survived that. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of what you will find on YouTube focuses on the soldiers and the more active participants. But I can't think of a more active participant than our first clip that we're going to take a look at, and I'll bring out the instructions here in just a second again. We're going to be seeing an interview with a former slave. Now, this is a rather involved interview, and if you'd like to, you can follow along. There's a great script of the actual interview that if you want to check that out, you can be sure to do this. This was from the Library of Congress. This should have just opened up in your computer if you're watching the Adobe Connect. If not, if you're watching this on YouTube, take a look for some buttons. I'll try to make this happen. So the Fountain Hughes interview, it is available, the script of it, but let's actually listen to it in his own words. This should start, for this particular clip, it should start around the 15 minute, 10 second mark, and we'll go through 20 minutes and 5 seconds, basically to where he starts talking about moving to Baltimore following the war and after he was freed. So a couple of questions, though, I want you to consider as you're listening to this clip. Which relative of Mr. Hughes was actually owned by a former U.S. president? Which president was that? What does Mr. Hughes say about Union troops during the Civil War? And I apologize for my typos. I just can't get past them. And what was Mr. Hughes' attitude towards slavery? Was he sentimental and forgiving, or was he realistic and bitter? So be listening to this, listening to the details in this audio clip from a survivor of the Civil War and slavery, Mr. Fountain Hughes. Again, the directions, I'm going to ask you to pause here in just a second. I'm going to open up the recording, and immediately after that's opened up, I will ask you to pause this recording, the actual lesson recording. We'll watch this about 5 minutes of it, and then we'll come back for a quick discussion of those questions. So without further ado, I'll be quiet, hit Browse to, and you can pause the lesson recording right now. And we're back in 3, 2. Well, there you have it. The words of a former slave describing some very interesting situations that he might have encountered in his life. So, which relative of Mr. Hughes was owned by a former president? It wasn't his father, it was his grandfather. There seemed to be some confusion on the part of the interviewer on this case. And he was actually owned, his grandfather was owned by Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson. And just to clarify, not only can you find clips to this interview on YouTube, it's also available at the Library of Congress. If you do a search for Fountain Hughes or Voices of Slaves, it's pretty easy to find. There's a lot of recordings out there from that were collected in the 1930s from former slaves. Unfortunately, the audio quality is fairly limited, and the speech patterns are rather difficult to decipher for some of the folks interviewed. But again, the Library of Congress is a great resource for this. What does Mr. Hughes say about Union troops during the Civil War? He was very young during the Civil War and does not recall much, but he does recall that Union troops destroyed food stores and also took many of the horses and other livestock from their farms, leaving not only the white Southerners to suffer, but also the former slaves and freed slaves were left to deal with lack of food and lack of other resources because they had been destroyed by Union troops. Mr. Hughes' attitude towards slavery, I think it's summed up towards the end there very well. When asked if he would ever go back to being a slave, he would take his own life as opposed to that possible outcome. So again, Mr. Fountain Hughes, very interesting stuff. I'm going to open up a biography if you'd like to learn more. Again, this should open up right in your screen. If it doesn't, you can just go to Web Links 8, Fountain Hughes Bio, click Browse to, and away you go. This is actually from Monticello. And what we find is, although Fountain himself is not a descendant of Thomas Jefferson, he actually is related to Thomas Jefferson through blood. I believe it was his descendant was a sister of Sally Hemings, who of course bore the children of our former President Thomas Jefferson. For more details on this, check out the Fountain Hughes bio and other great information at Monticello.com. Okay, our next clip, and let me go ahead and get some questions out here before we get into this. We'll chat a little bit about Julius Howe. Now, Julius Howe is a surviving Confederate officer, as I understand. Um, he survived the war after being taken prisoner at one point. And you're going to hear some of these details in this clip. Now, this is one of the longer clips that we'll listen to during the course of this lesson, coming in a little more than 10 minutes, but I do want you to keep these questions in mind. Where is Mr. Howe injured? Where is he taken prisoner? How is he injured? This is perhaps one of the most interesting things. Why did the Confederacy fight during the Civil War? And Mr. House has some very interesting views on this, especially his personal take on it and his viewpoint as a very young soldier fighting in the Civil War, and ultimately what is his opinion of slavery. Some fascinating words from a soldier who fought in the Civil War on the part of the Confederacy. As usual, I'll open this up. I'll ask you to pause this recording and listen to it. This isn't the entire clip. If that doesn't work, you can just go to Weblinks 9, click on Julius Howe, click Browse to, and away you go. I'm doing that right now, so I'll be quiet. You can go ahead and pause the lesson recording right now. And coming back in 3, 2. Well, there you have it. The account of Julius Howe, a Confederate soldier who was taken prisoner. Take a look at our questions. Where was Mr. Howe injured? He was actually injured in the defense of Richmond in one of the smaller skirmishes, not one of the larger battles. And he was taken, and he had to go on a couple of months of furlough to recover. He was taken prisoner. It sounds like he was taken prisoner at the Battle of Petersburg, at the defense there. I think this is interesting. In Mr. Howe's opinion, why did the Confederacy fight the Civil War? And this is a controversial question. To this day, this is very much debated among scholars and historians. But in the words of this Confederate soldier, he says it was for states' rights. We even hear him go on to say that he was very critical of slavery and was happy that his own children were not raised under the institution which he was. And I find that very interesting. And he even indicates that as a young man, this was very far from his mind. He really hadn't developed the intellect to consider these heavier questions. You can take that at face value or dismiss it. One of the things I want to clarify about Sight Society, I'm not here to guide your opinions. I'm here to offer my opinion from time to time, but this is up to you to develop your own opinions about history. The recording of this does conclude with the display of the Confederate battle flag, which some people might find offensive. The language might be offensive. Folks, history is offensive. We can cover it up, we can deny it, but that's not the way I teach history. History is ugly. History is unpleasant. And if we try to obscure the facts and the reality of history, we don't really understand it. It's even like the use of the term, with his accent, it sounds nigra. I believe it's a variation of the term Negro. It's an ugly word. It doesn't sound right from our perspective. But in the 1930s, when this was recorded, especially of a man of his age, that was the terminology. And it could have been much cruder. So, again, if you want to know more about Julius Howe, I want to give you a couple of links here. If you go to civilwar.org, this is a great website to learn more about the Civil War, specifically the Battle of Petersburg. I've got set up here, but this is an organization, the Civil War Trust, that purchases land to preserve it for former battlefields from the Civil War. It's not uncommon for Civil War battlefields to be covered up by shopping malls and convenience stores. And that's where the Civil War Trust comes in. I particularly like their website because when you look at the information, they break it down. And actually, let me pull some of this out of the way here real quick. And I'll share my screen here. I like how detailed They'll give you photographs from the area, the battle map. So when he's talking about confronting soldiers on such and such a road, there's a real chance you can find exactly where he's talking about through the battle's maps. And they have these for every major battle. Again, the Civil War Trust, a great resource. Let me put these directions back up here. We'll put these questions aside until so we can get ready for our next clip. Now, our next clip is not as long. It's a little more edited. It's a little more, dare I say, entertaining because it's a video of an actual Gettysburg Reunion where you have Union soldiers as well as Confederate veterans getting together. I want to say this is 1933. Pretty straightforward. Let's take a look at some questions. And I do think I'm kind of fascinated by this. Which side seems to get the most attention? Which side seems to be, and which side seems to have people most curious? What age are the veterans in attendance? Are these guys in my age in their 40s? Are they guys in their 60s? Um, and do the old veterans get along with each other? And I think this is something that is really fascinating. The relationship and the attitudes the northern and southern veterans seem to have towards each other. So once again, I hate to be so redundant, but I will start playing the video and I will pause this recording. You'll want to do the same. If for some reason our clip does not open up, you can open it yourself. Just go to Gettysburg Reunion under Web Links 9. And click there, click Browse to, and it should open up for you. So at this time, you can go ahead and pause the lesson recording and watch this clip of Gettysburg Reunion. Back in just a second. And coming back in 3, 2. Okay, there you have it, the Gettysburg Reunion from 1938. Many of those guys were in their 90s, some a little bit younger. My goodness. And which side of the conflict seems to get the most coverage? I think it's pretty apparent the Confederates hold the fascination of the media at this time. And I will tell you also that when I was putting this lesson together, trying to find a simple clip of a Union soldier recounting some battle was very difficult through normal means. It's out there. It exists. There's a lot of written stuff from Union soldiers. Of course, you know, the Red Badge of Courage is a dramatic account of difficult to find media from the Union perspective. Tons of stuff out there from the Confederate perspective, and even you can look at this news clip, and it'll tell you. Now, I mentioned earlier primary, secondary documents. This particular clip serves as both because it gives us a primary account of events of the Civil War, but it also gives us the interpretation of the announcers. And you know, even the one towards the end when the survivor from Pickett's Charge uses some relatively coarse language to say that if you weren't turning and running, you're a liar. And you know, the interviewer kind of scoffed at that, and that's where we get that secondary interpretation of an event. So pretty interesting artifact there. Do the old veterans get along with each other? They do. That's apparent through the video. That's apparent through the words and deeds of the folks who were involved there. Now, if you'd like to learn more about this, I have a great little resource here, Remembering the Last Reunion. I'll open that clip up for you. If, of course, it didn't open, you can just click on it and it'll make it happen for yourself. This is from NPR, so there is an audio recording you can listen to, and they also have a script that tells about these particular events. Another resource that you might find interesting, the Bella Grove Publishing Company. I'm not going to open this one up for you, but if you're interested in some books and some pretty interesting stuff from the Civil War, be sure to check that out. Now, I have to backtrack just a little bit here. For Julius Howe, the general, the Confederate soldier we heard from, I do have an involved biography here. I'm going to go ahead and open this, but I will warn you, this is from the Sons of Confederate Veterans. This group might have some bias in their historic accounting. They take a heroic perspective of the Civil War and most notably the Confederate survivors of the Civil War. So again, I'm not making a judgment call here, but the Sons of Confederate Veterans. I do think it is a solid biography for Mr. Howe. Okay, so let's go ahead and get ready for our next clip. Get the directions out here. The last clip that we're going to actually provide much in the way of questions for and analysis. The last clip that we're going to have, I'm going to leave that one up to you and let you just kind of feel your way through that one. But the next clip that we're going to do is an eyewitness account of the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. It comes from a person by the name of John Hazleton. He happened to be a young man, a very young boy, really, at the theater. He was doing some work there, and I'll let you listen to the details. Um, this is the thing you got to be careful with, though. Even though this is an eyewitness account, this is a primary source document. It has problems. He does well with what he saw. It's a lot of the other facts that you would want to double check before you use them in a research project. As far as what happens to John Wilkes Booth following the actual assassination, there's a lot of secondary source in here with the primary source. One other thing that I want you to pay special attention to when it comes to this clip is John Wilkes Booth. Let me rephrase that. Did John Wilkes Booth die where we think he died? This has been a controversy going on for some time. It's actually kind of gone to the back burner for the last couple of decades, but it's very much alive, and you're going to hear a little bit about it from John Hazleton's eyewitness account from the Civil War. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and get the recording happening. As always, if it doesn't open up for you when I make it open, let's go to Weblinks 9, click on Assassination Eyewitness. We'll watch this entire clip. It's a little long, but it's pretty interesting too. I'll go ahead and click Browse to and pause the recording at this time. You can go ahead and pause the lesson recording now. And coming back in 3, 2. Okay, there we have it, folks. The last recording from the last recording that we'll go through as a group. I got one more thing to part with. So, what was Mr. Hazleton doing at Ford's Theater? He was a program boy. In other words, not only handling programs, but also running some errands the day that Lincoln was assassinated. And I think if you listen to this in detail, you get a real sense that it jumps back between his own account and what he saw during that day, as well as what he saw afterwards. Now, perhaps most shocking or most interesting is what Hazleton proposes about the death of John Wilkes Booth, contradicting what we have accepted in historic terms. Now, that sounds kind of crazy that this St. Helen character might have actually been John Wilkes Booth, but I did a little bit of research, and the question, from what I can tell, seems somewhat unresolved. You can go check out an article, and this particular one comes from CBN, the Christian Broadcast Network. Pretty reliable source. But the last I was able to determine that there was still some wrangling between different family members as far as DNA testing to determine if the mummified St. Helen or the remains in the grave are legitimately John Wilkes Booth. So a historic question, and one that you can find out more about. If you'd also like, I'm going to go ahead and open this one up for you. He mentioned at the end of that recording, it's mentioned that you can actually access and get a copy of this account of the assassination signed by our reader, by Mr. Hazleton. And this link will take you right there. Now, of course, I think it's a different page, but again, you can actually see a copy of what you would have received in the mail had you sent Mr. Hazleton a buck or two back in the 1900s. Okay, there you have it, folks. So my point today is, if you want to know more about the Civil War, there's really a lot of ways to do it, and one of the most surprising ways is through the recorded eyewitness accounts of people who survived the war. That could include soldiers, both Confederate and Union. There's surviving slaves. There's people like this young man who happened to witness a historic event. And I apologize for not having any accounts by women. They're out there. I couldn't find one that really fit what I was looking to put together today. But if you wanted to find those um, those resources, they certainly are out there. Yes, it's hard to believe that if you wanted to talk to somebody from the Civil War, you pretty well could have. I tell the story from time to time that my grandfather, of course, talked to survivors of the Civil War. My great grandfather talked to survivors, people who survived the American Revolution. It's kind of worth talking to people from time to time. Okay, we're going to part. A couple other things I want to do here real quick before we get out of here. Site Society mailing list. I'm going to open this up in your screen. If you haven't done so, be sure to fill this out, and I'll be sure to send you a webmail letting you know when we have new resources like this lesson, like flashcards, like the homeschool guide to social studies. We're going to be doing a lot of this stuff, and we want you to have it. So just take a quick moment to fill out the Sipe Society subscription email, and we'll be sure to keep you informed of what's going on here. Your best source for free resources when it comes to social studies. We're going to part with the Veterans' last song. I'll go ahead and wrap things up. I encourage you to give this a listen. You know, and on one hand, it is a recording of an elderly man singing a rather simple song. But listen to the lyrics. Better yet, let's go ahead and check out those lyrics. I will open them up right now, and you can follow along as this Confederate veteran gives us the veteran's last song. Till next time, I'm Mr. Sipe, and I'll see you on the computer.